You're listening to the Rogers Sporting Goods Podcast with Patrick Fisher,
Chandler Smith,
and Josh from Outdoor Limits.
In this podcast, we'll touch on everything from gear to ducks to deer, turkey and fishing. From field to table, let's dive in. Turkey season's done, Chandler. For us. It's all over with.
He didn't bag
Did
one,
I
though.
tell you? Oh, well, I'm not going to tell that story on here. But if you
Oh, that story.
No, you can tell that story.
That's a great story.
I
You
can
don't have
make
to
it
tell
a
the story.
PG story.
Yeah, you can make it a PG story.
So everybody's got a hunting story. Well, I would imagine everybody's got a story like this. Mine just usually happens during hunting. So, so we go out. I guess it would have been not this last weekend, so the weekend before. So it was the second weekend of turkey season, and so it was kind of my turn. We went out opening day, and the wife got one, and so then we went out this little over a week ago, and we get in there, and like on the way up to the farm, like my stomach, I was like, oh my gosh, it's not good. Well, we get everything set up. I get the decoy set up, set the chairs out. We're sitting there, and it's like peak time. Gobbles going off on the roost. I'm sitting there, and I'm like, uh-oh. And it's like right time, you know. You never know, like Tom's just going to fly down right into the decoys. And the sun, it was just shooting time, like 10 minutes into the, shooting time. I'm like, I've got to go to the bathroom. And the wife goes, just run to the truck and, whatever, find some napkins or toilet paper or something. So I ran across the cornfield just sprinting, which is even worse because you're trying to keep everything internal while you're running to the truck. But get into the truck, we don't have anything. I'm like, oh my gosh. And I dive into the woods, and that was all she wrote. I used my T-shirt. It was bad. Anyway, so now I'm tired. I'm like, ugh. I go all the way back. Sit down, like 40 minutes go by. 40, 45 minutes. Came back. Hit me again. She's like, let's just pack up and go home. I was like, we're out. Yeah. It was bad.
Yeah, that was your last turkey
But
hunting experience.
That was it. That's how I ended my season, was duty drawers. But whatever. It's lesson learned. But it was a good season overall. I mean, son, you got one. Mm-hmm. Chandler, lucky enough, got to go to Texas.
Oh, cool.
And got
West Texas and shot 2 Rios out there.
Nice.
Yeah.
But I didn't actually tag one in Missouri, though. No eastern in Missouri.
Did you went out a couple times, though? Did you take was it your brother?
My brother, yeah.
Yeah. Trying to get him on one.
We got on him, but
yeah.
we didn't.
Did you do some like public land?
No.
Yeah. Around this area.
Yeah. We got onto some birds.
You can get on some birds up there at Smithville.
Yeah.
I know. Some decent spots.
Yeah, you can find them.
Up there. But a lot of, were you, when you went, and you've been to Smithville before to do, is that where you went? Or
Yeah.
are you doing more run and gun calling since it's more public? Or
No.
were you doing,
We brought decoys out.
you kind of set up in a spot you already knew?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's an area I know of, and
Yeah.
there's
You just know they're kind of in that
I know.
spot.
Patrick, quit asking him for a spot.
Yeah. If you
Well,
want to go,
know,
Pat, I'll take you there.
If you could drop me a pin.
I love it, man. Pat just totally puts it on blast where he hunts every single time.
Well, Smithville's a big area.
Not really.
Well,
there's a lot of areas there. I mean, I've gone all over the lake and before season and found birds in all sorts of different areas. So it can be done, and it's potentially you could use the water to get in on the backside and access.
that's cool. Yeah.
So,
Used to have
Potentially, hypothetically.
yeah.
He used to have a neighbor that went deer hunting a lot, and he took his canoe out, and he would get into these back areas of Smithville, and he always got an awesome deer.
Mm-hmm.
Get into these spots, no one's around, you know.
Yeah.
You're not 10 yards off the road.
Yeah.
I've been there before. The sun comes up, and we're like, oh, shoot. We might as well get out of here.
Yeah.
We're sitting 10 hunters around us. But
I mean, the place I was at, you had 6 Galbers around. They just didn't cooperate. A couple mornings we went out because we were just weekend warriors, you know. But so yeah, Pat, who we with?
Well, today, so we brought in, I guess we're calling you Nick, but Nicholas Oakley from the MDC. He's the, are you the state turkey biologist from Missouri?
Right. Yep. State turkey and rough grouse.
And rough grouse biologist from the Missouri Department of Conservation. As always, we've got Chandler down on the end and Josh as well to my right.
Yeah, he's bringing the Kansas point of view.
That's right. And Hayden behind the cameras, making sure everything's online, and me, Patrick. But with turkey season just wrapping up, so we kind of been working on this. I thought it would be a good idea to bring in Nick and get his point of view on the statewide turkey population. Talk about turkey hunting in general, and every spring it comes up. It's a big topic of discussion. There's a million point of views out there. So we want to get his side of it, obviously our side of it, and just have a turkey discussion. And really it's just another way to spread knowledge on maybe some things that people don't know or haven't heard of. And I already told Nick, I said, I'm going to play devil's advocate some on him here. So, but it's a good way to wrap up the turkey season that we just had. So
you want to start with
kind of see where we're going,
the numbers, and then we'll kind of go backwards, I guess. How did we do this season?
How was
Nick?
this year?
Yeah, so this year, and I got my cheat sheet in front of me because the numbers came out on Tuesday, but we shot about 44,500 turkeys in Missouri this year. Overall, during the spring season, it was closer to 42,000, and then the youth, they shot about 2,500. So putting that into context, that's quite a bit better, about 20% better than last year, and even a little bit better than the year before. But overall, if you go back to the peak, the prime time of turkey hunting in Missouri, that would have been maybe the mid 2000s. In 2004, Missourians shot a little over 60,000 turkeys.
Oh, geez.
So 40,000 is a good number, and 45 is a number that perhaps folks can be, if not happy about, at least think we're doing okay. When you compare it to 60,000, certainly. There was a time where there was more turkeys killed in Missouri. From my perspective, I think 60,000 was kind of one of those inflated boom cycles, right? So as you look across the Southeast, you've seen, and most of the Midwest, you've seen turkey populations go from almost none to these big peaks, right? As birds are moved around the country, moved around states. And then almost predictably, in every state, and it's a timeline where you can see states where birds were moved to at about the same time, they're going through about the same period of population decline. So that's really what we're confronted with right now is how where's the bottom, essentially. I don't think we get back to 60,000 birds harvested. I don't think that would be a realistic goal, but I think there's certainly room for improvement. So, maybe this is the first step in that direction. After several years of fairly, again, for Missouri, poor hunting.
Yeah. But overall, pretty successful year.
Yeah. And so I think I would attribute that to a couple of things. Number one is the weather was excellent. We didn't have any real rain out days. There wasn't a whole period, 3 or 4 days in a row where we got rain. For the most part, across the entire state, you could hunt any day this season. It was a little windy certain mornings, no doubt. But the weather was very good, and so I think that absolutely probably goosed the harvest numbers. But we're also coming off of a year of relative stability, or 3 years of relative stability as far as the hatch quality and production goes. We measure that using our spring brood survey, which anyone can participate in. We collect data from anyone, June, July, and August. And what that does is that gives us kind of an index of how the quality of the hatch, essentially. So as you go back again, and I don't want to try and zoom back out all the time, but we started collecting these data in 1959, which would have put Missouri way on the front edge of collecting those data. Some states still don't really collect it. Production, the number of poults each hen is producing on average was on the increase. As the production was increasing, you saw the harvest increase, which makes sense, right? Hens are producing more poults, more birds are alive to be harvested. Well, that also started to decline in the 90s to a point where in 2016 and 2017, our production hit the lowest level that we'd ever recorded at less than a poult per hen. Now, the last 3 years, that production has been a little more stable at around a poult per hen. And so I think coming out of that dip, that low spot, is one of the reasons, in addition to the weather, that perhaps there's a few more birds out there to be harvested.
Yeah. Well, to take us, before we really dive into this, so obviously you're the turkey biologist, but how long have you been with MDC now? And kind of take us like, how you got into it, where you studied at, where you came from, so we kind of have a background.
Yeah, so mine would be, it started out the very cliche, prototypical, grew up in a rural community. My parents had 75 acres at which I could just wander around as a kid. I largely taught myself to hunt. We would have the opening deer season weekend with my dad's brothers and my cousins would come out, and there'd be 10 hunters on 75 acres. I mean, you could
quite a bit
tight.
Little
tight. You definitely, we had a map. So like, here is where everyone's hunting. Like, as you're sitting here, you can't shoot that way. So we tried to have a safety briefing, but needless to say, there were not a lot of deer killed during those weekends. It was a little hectic out there.
Yeah.
But I'd come home after school and grab my bow and spend the last 2 hours of the evening in the bow stand. And so I sort of fell in love with it that way. Turkey hunting, I had almost no mentorship. It was not something that anyone I really grew up with was that passionate about. I think I was probably a product of watching the Outdoor Channel as a kid, watching people, the Primoses and things of those people, those figures go out and shoot turkeys in the spring, and it got me excited. So my dad had a box call that I think he got on a trade or something for some service that he rendered. So I just went out there in my Carhartt overalls and my box call, and I just started yelping away. Yeah. And the first time a gobbler responded, I was like, "Oh my God,
this is working!"
So exciting.
Yeah.
And then I proceeded to, of course, blow that. And for a couple years after that, because I had no idea what I was doing, slowly upgraded my kit. Added a little more camo, added a little more expertise, learned how to use a pot call and a diaphragm, and then finally got that first bird. I was probably 14 or so, but that was exciting, right? So that kind of built into me this notion that, like, man, I'd love to work outside. It'd be interesting. I don't think at that point I knew that such a thing as a wildlife biologist even existed. But when I started digging into the University of Missouri, I was half committed to going there before I even started looking around, and I noticed they had a wildlife biology degree as an offering. So I thought, okay, let's try that, and loved it. I mean, the classes were really interesting. I really remember going out. So that's kind of where I diverged from sort of the standard state turkey biologist approach. I took my first ornithology class, and I was like, oh, I want to do bird research. And so most of my early work was in doing songbird studies. So there's a great program in Southern Missouri, a project in Southern Missouri, where they're looking at how forest management practices affect pretty much everything as far as like the wildlife goes, but there was a bird component to that. So that was my first job. I went down there and just got to hang out all summer looking for birds in the woods and listening for birds. And that really, once I graduated undergrad, I just sort of followed that around. So I did the 5+ years of traveling throughout mostly the Western United States, just trying to find those 6-month positions. I worked with some raptors. I worked with spotted owls. I worked with a bird that lived on an island off the coast of San Diego for a while. Did a little work with like desert tortoises down by Las Vegas. Just enjoyed it, but then started to get a little burned out, kind of on that temporary, that ephemeral lifestyle.
Yeah.
So I ended up meeting my now wife at one of our field jobs, and she ended up taking a grad position at the University of Wyoming. So I was left with the decision to like sort of hang on and continue with the field work lifestyle, or try and go there and make something work. So I went there, and lo and behold, ended up running into a professor who was looking for a grad student. And so we worked something out. At that point, I had just been hired as a lifty at a ski resort, so I was not looking forward to that $9 an hour paycheck to go freeze my butt off on top of a windy mountain in Wyoming. So he's like, hey, I've got a project starting up. You'll have to go to Ecuador this winter to start collecting data. And I thought, oh yeah, okay,
Let me get my bags.
yeah, let me think. Yes, the answer is yes. So I ended up studying for my graduate work. It was a behavioral ecology project where I studied the courtship behavior of the golden-winged mannequin, which I always make the joke is very much a David Attenborough-esque. The female approaches the male on the display log and that sort of thing. But
One of them documentaries.
Exactly.
You hear that.
Exactly.
Yes.
But it taught me a lot about ecology. I was the TA for population ecology courses and general ecology courses, so I learned a lot through that, in addition to kind of the analytical side of the field, which I think probably goes unremarked upon whenever the young kids are excited to do biology. The reality is you spend a lot of time in front of a computer and a lot less time out under the trees. But yeah, I learned a lot there. Then my wife again wanted to move, and so we ended up back in Missouri. She found a job with the Department of Conservation as one of their wildlife health specialists. And sure enough, I got a job working at the beginning. I worked as an hourly for our waterfowl biologist, and then I got a job fairly quickly thereafter as the science assistant in the game and regulations unit. So I worked and helped all of our kind of statewide game species biologists do odds and ends projects. I had a pretty large role in the grouse reintroduction effort once I came on to that project. I helped a fair bit whenever we were transitioning between two different fur bear and bear biologists. So I helped with our spring den checks and things like that. And then whenever the previous biologist decided to leave to get closer to home, I decided I'd like to apply at least for this turkey biologist job that I didn't know if I'd even have a competitive application, frankly. And yeah, luckily enough, here I am a year later, just about. This was my first spring turkey season as the biologist, so it's been a whirlwind, that's for sure.
You had them Ecuadorian bird on your resume, and they're like, "That's the guy.
That's our guy.
That's the guy. He'd take a chance."
Yeah,
That's cool. So it's been, you said what, 3 years now?
about 3 years.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Maybe 4 now. It
Gotcha.
kind of runs together. It was BC before COVID when I started, so yeah.
Yes.
Coming on 4
Yeah.
years.
And before you, it was
Yeah, her name was Raina Tile.
Yeah.
Yep.
So if anybody's listening, you're maybe you remember her as the turkey biologist, and so she moved back to Pennsylvania. You said.
Yep.
So.
Yep. She's
Okay.
now Pennsylvania Game
Gotcha.
Commission's rough
Gotcha.
grouse biologist.
All right. Yeah. So the big thing, I guess, as we dive in, and we might probably veer off here, and if you guys got a question or something, just throw it out, because you know me, I don't stop talking. So, but the big thing, like I guess this is, no one's disputing this part of it, but the turkey population in general is on a decline, or is declined from where it's been.
From the peak, or
From the peak, like, the eye test, like I tell myself, like, if I drive from here to Iowa along I-35, compared to when I was a kid in the mid-'90s, late '90s, where I can remember, just the eye test alone.
Seeing turkeys.
Yeah. I mean, it was field after field. You would just see turkeys. You do that now. Honestly, I don't know the last time I saw a turkey driving from here to my farm. in a field, you know, at least in this area. But yeah, so like you said, I thought it was great when we were talking previously, like someone would call you up and be like, hey, do you know,
That's right.
as the turkey biologist, you do realize they're on a decline? Why, yes, yes, I do.
That has come
Thank
up.
you. You know, so as we sit here today and discuss all this, and obviously there's a million opinions and different viewpoints, and so we're going to try to dive into a lot of that about the turkey population, where it stands, the efforts, where we want to be, things like that. So, you know, just kind of off the bat, some of the things, you know, I'd like to talk about are like the causes, things like that. I know one, well, we'll bounce all over the place, but like one would be like habitat loss. So like, and I could see that obviously, like in my mind, at the simplest viewpoint is with the habitat loss, whether it's you know, like CRP and that type of management, or forestry and timber management and things like that, is towns are growing and there's more acquisition of land, and it's turned into warehouses, and it's turned, you know, you just look around, we're expanding, right? So it's less land, just in general. But yeah, let's talk about like the habitat portion of it, kind of what you're seeing from the state level, and you know, where things are and why that's one of the things that's, you know, in this decline.
Sure. Yeah. And so specifically when we're thinking about habitat, and maybe I'll zoom out a little bit and talk about where we think kind of, right. So the overall population has declined or is declining. And a lot of that depends on where you are kind of in that restoration timeline, right? In Missouri, I'd say we've gone through the boom and the bust, right? So either we've bottomed out or we've started to bounce back. I think, you know, I think that's where we're at. Now, in 5 years, that may look like a horrible prediction or take on things. But looking at things, you know, the last 5 years, we've had lower but stable harvests, right? So maybe we've bottomed out. So what they've looked at is what's changed as far as like turkey demographics. And what I mean about demographics or vital rates are just like, so like, are adults not surviving as long? And that doesn't seem to be the truth. You know, our nest size is smaller. It doesn't seem that way. Our nest success is lower a little bit. Is poult survival lower a little bit. So whenever you really kind of zoom in on what's changed between 1980, for example, and 2015, it looks like it's that production number has declined. And that's what we see in our production data set from those brood surveys, and that's what we see in the research. So when we're talking about habitat, it's not necessarily that all the habitat has gone away. It's that nesting and brood rearing habitat has changed or degraded, or we've lost it. So whenever you're driving through down the road, you know, whenever you're thinking about brood habitat, it's really specific. So it tends to be either a woodland with a very robust herbaceous layer. So you've got like the sunflowers in the forest, you know, not sunflowers, but like coneflowers in the forest, and a nice grass layer. You know, stands somewhere between knee high and waist high. You know, that's brood habitat, and you just don't see it. I look everywhere I go. I probably shouldn't say this publicly, but when I'm driving the state truck, I'm as often looking at the road as I'm looking out the window, and you just don't see it. And I think one of the things that people, that I hear a lot is like, hey man, nothing's changed. I haven't done anything to my property in 30 years. Nothing has changed. And I was like, by doing nothing, things have changed, of course, right? The trees have gotten larger. The canopies have closed in, right? We're not getting as much sunlight to the forest floor. And by doing that, we're choking out that important herbaceous layer, that forb layer and grass layer. And that's that really prime brood rearing habitat. And I think that's a big reason why things have declined. And that lack of habitat, I think, is kind of the root of all the things that I suspect we're going to talk about later, right? A hen has fewer places to take her brood. She has the places that she can take her brood are further away from that brood or from that nesting habitat. You know, anything that tilts the scale against a poult is going to be bad news for that poult. Because already, even in the best of cases, it's hard to be a turkey egg or a turkey poult on the landscape.
Yeah, so that habitat, so that nesting area, so what you're saying is that undergrowth, that area, you know, is what were you saying? Almost waist high, knee high, waist high. But
Yeah.
that they're going to use that as their cover.
Their cover.
To nest.
Yep. It's going to be a bug factory.
Like.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think you brought up a good point. Like not doing anything, is changing still.
Absolutely.
So, and is that where like you see with like forest management, you come in and you take out some certain trees and you keep that without them canopies closing off. There you go. You get that sunlight down into the forest floor, so things can grow and different.
If I could make a statewide prescription for privately managed lands, it would be to use your chainsaw and drip torch a heck of a lot more than you currently are.
Yeah.
Take out trees, thin that forest. We call it a woodland restoration. You can do that through harvest. Where you go in and select trees to cut to sell, or you just go in and do timber stand improvement where you're, those 25-year-old maple trees that don't have much value to wildlife, cut them down. They're just shading out all the good ground, that sort of thing.
Yeah. And
Josh, you got any turkeys on your family's Missouri farm?
No, we don't.
No, you don't. Do you have any like areas like that potentially could be, nesting or roosting habitat potentially?
A little bit, not much though. It's a lot of crop ground.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And probably surrounded by other crop ground.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I didn't know if you did or not.
So that's another an interesting thing to bring up, and I would absolutely encourage everyone to do everything they can, even if you've got a small piece of property. But a hen's going to have a home range of 7,000 acres. So you may not have the exact right habitat for nesting or brood rearing. Maybe yours is better served as winter ground, right, where we've got the mature mass-producing species. But it takes a lot of space to grow a turkey. They use different types of habitat throughout the year, so it can be complex. It's not one of those things where you can just flip a switch or do something small and make a big difference. It takes kind of a communal effort, and I think that's.
And this would be different from turkey to deer. So like you see people when they go in and they do like hinge cutting to create more of these bedding areas and habitats for deer. So if you're like a deer hunter, that's kind of what you do. But you wouldn't do that for turkeys. Hinge cutting actually is drowning out that nesting area. Like turkeys wouldn't benefit from hinge cutting.
They would probably nest. And if you did like an extensive hinge cut, they may nest in that, but that would not be good brooding habitat.
Right.
Yep.
So I just, in case someone was listening, is like, well, I do hinge cutting.
Yep.
But I think what you're talking about is getting rid of some trees and then doing the burning. I see a lot of people do the burning.
So that does a couple of things. That sort of top kills the woody vegetation. It won't kill it all, right? And next year it'll come back, and then you burn again in a year or two, and then that top kills it again. But and then it also kind of stimulates that herbaceous growth. So when you run fire through, it'll take the leaf litter off, and then allows the sun to hit the bare ground, and then that's whenever stuff blows up. And the idea, the way I try and envision it in my head, is that the vegetation needs to be tall enough that a poult can hide in it, but short enough that a hen can see over it, right? They're visual animals. If they can see 100 yards and pick a coyote out from 100 yards away, they can take evasive measures, right? If all of a sudden they come around a corner and a bobcat's standing there, not a very good opportunity. You're going to lose a few of those poults, if not all of them.
Yeah. And I think I was reading, the MDC has some programs where they can come out. Like if you're wanting to help your turkey population specifically with habitat, isn't that something that you guys offer?
Yeah, absolutely. So each county or a couple of counties has what we call a private land conservationist. And those are folks that you can call up. They tend to be associated with an NRCS office or a USDA office. They'll come out, they'll walk around the property with you. You'll talk, you'll have a conversation about what you actually want, right? So if you want to grow turkeys or quail, or you want it to be deer habitat, or if you want it to be whippoorwill habitat or monarch habitat, they can talk to you, they can make management recommendations, and even plug you into some of the cost share money that we have access to. So there's a whole just litany of programs that I can't even begin to dig into because frankly I don't understand them still, and it's just acronym soup. It's hard to wade through, but they're well trained and very familiar with how those programs work and what would make, say an equip is one of those programs, an equip application more, have a higher chance of success whenever it goes through that selection
that
process.
avenue's there.
Yep.
For sure.
Yep.
If you're wanting to. So, and I think they can probably, you contact your local office and get in touch with the right people. But so that's one thing. Obviously, habitat loss. That makes sense.
Yep.
And like I said, with just the expanding of towns and less farmland and and a lot of land now is becoming privately owned. So with privately owned land, then those people have to become the people that help with the population growth.
Yeah, absolutely.
And not doing nothing sometimes isn't always the best avenue.
Rarely
nature changes over the course of time. So
we typically define our habitats by the way the disturbance goes through them, right? So sagebrush out west would be a low disturbance type place. A 3-foot tall sagebrush could be 150 years old and a fire's never touched it. That's not what's happening in Missouri. So all of our landscapes are dominated by disturbance, right? If you think about the old tall grass prairies, fires would go through that to maintain it. Bison would go through and maintain it the same way. The forests in like the Ozarks, those are on a natural burn rotation of 3 to 7 years. I think they've determined. So by leaving it alone, it's not becoming more natural. It's actually becoming less natural, less like it was pre human,
Gotcha.
if you will.
One of the other things that I found would be a reason for a decline is obviously we talk about weather. So, so one thing, if people don't know a lot, but if a poult, and I believe it's the poult, so if they get, rained on too much, that can cause hypothermia or that can cause the poults to pass away.
Yeah, the little poults, they still have kind of down feathers for the first 2 or 3 weeks of their life. So if they get wet, it doesn't beat off of them, so they kind of get wet to the skin. And then if it gets cool at night or something like that, they'll get hypothermia, or hypothermia, because they can't thermoregulate nearly as efficiently.
I would tell turkeys then the springtime is a bad time
to hatch your eggs.
To have your eggs.
To hatch your clutch.
Can we move this out a little bit more? So, but yeah, weather obviously plays a part in it. I don't know if, and this is me looking at it, I just felt like weather-wise, is that really one of the biggest factors, or is it kind of down on the list? Because to me, in Missouri, I feel like our winters have been decently mild. If we talk about, I can't remember. I feel like we don't get a lot of snow,
right?
At least generally over the past few years. The springtime, rain-wise, gosh, I don't know how severe weather we have to get. I don't know. I was talking to Chandler. I was like, well, what was the spring turkey hunting like after the flood in '93? I wonder how. Apparently, it must have been terrible then because of that's a pretty big severe weather. But is weather really one of the main causes, or is it pretty far down on the list?
It's a good question, and I think it's something that we're still learning a bit about, which is the classic cop-out answer, but I'll try and explain why. So you're right. I think as far as things are going, weather-wise, we're seeing more extreme events. So it may be overall drier or wetter than it has been in the past, but the events where we're getting rain, it's no longer a quarter inch here, half inch there. It's 3 inches today. And then 6 weeks later, it's another 3 inches, right? So the monthly average may be higher, but it's those two events. And those tend to be probably a little more severe as far as a mortality event. But the reason why it's hard to really suss that out is anyone who's been on a lake has seen a squall go by where you're barely getting sprinkled on, and a quarter mile away, it's just getting dumped on. And so we don't have the fineness, that fine scale weather data, right? We'll take data from, as many weather stations as exist, but if there's 10 miles between them, it's really hard to know how that would affect, production. It tends to be, as you said, it tends to be a poult issue. So one of the research projects that we've got going on in North Missouri, up around, it's in Putnam County, north of Kirksville, is they put out a bunch of weather stations. They're collecting that data at like a really fine scale. And so I'm curious to see what comes out of it. But I would say weather probably isn't the biggest factor most years, and then some years it's absolutely the biggest factor. So if you had, maybe 93 would be a good example. I should look into that. That'd be interesting to see. But if you had one year where it was just a complete washout, you would probably see that year's production decline.
Yeah, I would imagine with the wide scale flooding and how much rain we had that spring, a lot of the hatch, was taken out. Or like a terrible winter, not as much now around Missouri, but I suppose if you had a really severe winter where it was just constant snow and blizzards, you're not ruining the hatch, but you are, you might have hens that die or toms that are viable to breed with hens. And so if, and maybe this is a specific to a farm, maybe your farm
100%.
flooded that, right? We get different weather from north to south to see, so some people might be like, well, weather hasn't played a part here, but maybe northwest Missouri along the river bottoms or something, it flooded out. So to them, it just killed their, overall. So I just looking at it, I'm thinking, but you brought up a good point. Maybe it's not necessarily the overall, but those severe times. So if it's not necessarily just the weather itself, it's the severe weather where it's just a downfall for 3 inches or whatever it is all at once.
And like at a specific time of year. So we expect, most of the hens in a perfect world, they would all hatch roughly the same time, right? That's the predator swamping approach, where if there's a million poults out on the ground, predators can only eat so many per day before they get big enough that they can evade predation. So if we get a big rain event, 3 days after, a big pulse of hatching happens, that may be a big deal. Whereas if that happened 3 days before, it wouldn't have done any damage, or 10 days later, it may not have done nearly as much damage. So it's variable. And again, I'm not sure that we have the fine scale data to really tease that out. But we do know that poults die from weather related events. So it does have some bearing.
Gotcha.
I'm not sure how much though.
Okay. So what would be, I think it brings us to maybe one of the biggest concerns people might have, and that would be predators. It's always brought up with the decline in the turkey population. So in your point of view, or what you're seeing, predator-wise, where are we at? How's that looking? What's the concerns? Is it a specific species? Is it, what's your thought on that?
A lot of thoughts.
Yeah.
A lot of thoughts on that.
Right. I got you.
No. So when you dig into the literature and you look at kind of cause-specific mortality, right? So people who put trackers on poults and then go figure out what killed the poult, or why the poult died, I suppose. Overwhelmingly, it's predators, right? So 80% of poults are killed by predators or something like that. Now, what we don't know is that really where it's been for the last 500 years, or is that a recent phenomenon where predators are killing more birds? I am inclined to think that predators have always killed turkeys. That's why the turkey biology is the way it is, right? A hen has, up to 12 or 13 eggs. That's because she's expecting to lose a few to predators. Hens, if they lose a nest early, can re-nest. That's because they expect to lose some nests to predators. So predators have been a part of the system forever, right? Turkeys evolved with most of these predators. Now, to your point, I think the predator density almost certainly is inclining. It's on the increase, right? If you look at all of our observations, so we've got bow hunter surveys where folks who are out in the bow stand, they just jot down what they see. You see a real steady increase on things like bobcats and coyotes and raccoons. And those are probably some of the primary predators of turkeys. But breaking it down a little further, you've got, animals that predate turkeys at the nest and then after they've hatched. So, and we're talking about poults here. Most adult birds aren't predated for the most part, though. We'll get into adult predation after I talk about poult predation. So a lot of things will eat an egg, and they've shown that, right? So like if a raccoon comes across a nest, they'll eat the eggs, right? That's a great meal for a raccoon. Same with the possums and skunks. Those tend to be kind of the primary mesocarnivore nest raiders, people will refer to them as. And for the most part, those are all inclining on the increase. After a poult hatches, maybe still as a real young, you'll see a raccoon take a little poult or something like that, but that becomes less of an issue. Then you're looking more at bobcats and coyotes and foxes and things of that nature. A fox will also raid a nest. I forgot about that. So yeah, it's an issue for sure. Another thing that we don't have much control on at all would be things like avian predators, right? So crows and ravens are very, very good at keying in on nests. They understand, they're incredibly bright. It's pretty remarkable. So they're probably depredating a lot of nests. Snakes, we can't really do much about snakes. They can depredate nests, things of that nature. So there's a lot of things that will eat an egg and eat a poult. A lot fewer things can eat an adult turkey, right? So your raccoons are not out there hunting adult turkeys. But a hen is super vulnerable when she's on the nest, right? Her whole strategy is to just be as still and quiet as she possibly can. But sometimes that's still not enough, right? So if a bobcat comes by, it smells her downwind. If he walks downwind of the nest, then they'll go in and they'll remove that hen. And that also causes, of course, a nest failure if the hen's not there. So yeah, it's an issue. I think really, for me, what it comes down to is it's a habitat problem again, right? So that's a symptom of the lack of habitat or the decreasing volume of habitat on the landscape. So if you've got a small patch of nesting habitat surrounded by non-nesting habitat, it's pretty easy to hunt that, right? If there's one turkey in there, she's probably going to get found. Now, if that's a big old patch of that same type of habitat, it gets harder for that predator to potentially pick up that bird. So to me, it's as much a predator control issue as it is a habitat issue. But that said, I never recommend against trapping. I just think that the habitat work needs to come first. So if the habitat doesn't exist, trapping the predators isn't going to do much, right? You're kind of getting your cart before the horse there. However, if you've done all the habitat work that you think you can, and you're still not seeing a response, at least in that production side of things, then maybe a real targeted trapping approach is warranted. But there's a lot of caveats that go into trapping fur bears. I'm not sure how far down that road you want to go.
Yeah. I mean, overall, trapping, I would say, is on the decline.
Well off of where it has been.
Yeah. And there's not much you can do about that. Like the one thing people bring up a lot is the price of a pelt. Well, those days are done.
They're done.
Yeah. We're not going to see the price of pelts skyrocket. No one's paying for pelts anymore. So
do you guys stock coonskin hats?
No.
Yeah.
I just think that's off the board as a viable option. That's just not going to happen. But is there things? Well, I know we changed right, Chandler, like in Missouri, we changed the coyote thing. I know that's what is it like during the night now? Like doing? Didn't they just change the?
I'm unfamiliar with this.
I think
something
with the thermals and different things like that. So
certain
to try to
year.
help,
right.
I don't know how many more coyotes, but I guess any more, would help.
It's an interesting question,
to a little bit, but taking another coyote out might help, but
it might hurt though. So that's when it gets really squirrely and weird. So coyotes in particular, they kind of operate on a dominance hierarchy. So if you've got a dominant pair of coyotes on your property, you'd have two, maybe four. If you shot one of those or both of those dominant animals off, you'd have 10, right? They'd come in and try and fill that void and then work something out amongst themselves with however they do their dominance hierarchy work. So coyotes are tricky because they move around so much, and some percentage of coyotes never settle into a specific dominance situation. So they're coursing, they're running all around the countryside looking for kind of a spot to call their own. And it's similar with raccoons in that if you don't take out a high enough proportion of raccoons, then there's they call it like a compensatory breeding or something like that, where the following year, right? So say you took out 20% of the raccoons on your property, the following year they would make up for that with birth rates. The birth rates would pulse, and you'd end up with potentially more raccoons on your property. Again, that's not to say we shouldn't be considering trapping as like a viable tool in the toolkit. I absolutely think we should. And also I think we should be promoting trapping as a pastime. It's a way to get out in the woods. It's a way to connect with nature. I think I did not grow up trapping, and I haven't really begun trapping, but I think it's an interesting way of approaching the world through a different set of eyes, right? A deer hunter walks through the world differently than a turkey hunter, than a duck hunter. Trappers, I think, are the same way. They see sign that I just miss. But you need to go into it with a plan, right? So you need to be really focused. Trapping after the breeding season has taken place, probably not super effective, after the nesting season. You need to be, it's a yearly requirement, right? So if you start doing it, you got to maintain it. It's much like habitat work. It's constant and ongoing. But yeah, if you don't do it for the love of it or for the potential benefit to the population of turkeys or ground nesting birds, it's quite a lot of work. It's quite a lot of work.
I didn't know. I guess I never looked into the coyote thing of.
Well, I've heard a lot about the coyote. You shoot one, a lot of things happen. They just like the raccoons you're saying, they breed more, or they tend to replace that, you replace that size of
I didn't know that.
of group. I didn't know that about raccoons though.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They do the same thing.
Yeah. It's a little different because it's mostly that like kind of resident raccoons just have more babies versus coyotes where, not like neighbors' coyotes will just move onto your place essentially.
Mm-hmm.
So if you took out you take out a couple, and they might be the dominant ones you're seeing all the time, and then all of a sudden you're going to get a ton more come in because now they're going to be looking to take over
that territory.
Mm-hmm. So instead of just the two, now you might have, 4 or 5, whatever it may be. But
and you can keep on top of it. It just requires that you got to keep on top of it. It's not one of those things where I shot a few and I've done my job. And
and the trapping takes time too.
Oh, 100%.
Because you got to check them every 24 hours.
Yeah.
So there's a lot that goes into that too.
Yep.
I mean, trapping takes a lot of time.
Right. But if you focus it around your nesting and brooding areas, you could make the case that you probably are helping as long as you're maintaining the effort and you're doing it really diligently.
Yeah.
But without the habitat, if you haven't done the habitat work, I would say trapping is not going to help you. At all.
You would boil it down to we're still back to the habitat.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the.
If you think of the leaky bucket analogy, which is cliche and trite, the habitat's the low hole. If you don't address that low hole, it doesn't matter how many of the holes above it that you plug up.
Right.
You gotta.
But is that on your list? Is habitat? That's the number one priority.
Yeah.
That we have to take care of.
Yep.
Okay.
There you go, Pat.
Because a lot of people would say, like, just I never hear habitat. You hear predators.
Yeah, that's true. That's the buzzword.
I mean, that's what everybody. Coyotes and predators are on the incline, which they are. I would imagine they are. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's hard not to see that too with the eye test. Is like they're increasing.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Gosh, I don't know how many raccoons I got on my place, and there's another one. So like my farm specifically. And then maybe this would be where I need you bring out someone from the MDC, the land specialist is.
Yeah, I was wondering if you think you have some of those.
Well,
those
so
brood areas that he was talking about.
Well, yeah, I'm trying to think. So 10 years ago, I go back 10 years when I started hunting it. And when I first started hunting with my wife there, and every spring, I mean, it was on. So the farm split, with the RA road, so you can hunt both sides, and there was turkeys everywhere, both sides, all the time. And you'd see tons of them in the spring or in the fall too, you know, because you're out there and they're running around. And then springtime and roll around, and it didn't matter which side you sat on because you knew they were coming. It was almost a given not to get a turkey. And over the past 4 or 5 years, it just kept getting lower and lower and lower. And now, you know, you hear 1 or 2 gobbling maybe on your property, and the one that did got shot. But you know, I'm seeing coyotes on camera, trail cams. I'm seeing bobcats. I've got the story with the feed.
Yeah.
All the raccoons. I probably had 30 or 40 for 2 weeks straight. Sit on top of a feed pile. I'm like, well, we got raccoons too. So, would raccoons, if you were going to look at predators, are they kind of number one?
If I had to focus,
I mean, they just raid nests.
Yeah, if I had to focus on one species, it would be raccoons.
Because it's like they're taking out the nest before it even gets going.
Yep.
Where poults, let's just say that 3 or 4 did hatch. Right. You know, a bobcat or coyote, you know, is, you know, maybe they're not getting all of them, but a raccoon just taking out the whole.
Has that potential.
Yeah, has the potential of taking out the whole nest.
Yeah.
Possums too.
Yeah,
is that a fallacy?
What about
Because everybody's
armadillos
like,
Southern Missouri.
don't mess with the possums because they take care of ticks. But I've looked into that, and that's not really. I don't think they help with the ticks as much as you think.
Treat my clothing.
Fire's better at killing ticks than possums. Burn your forest, folks. Burn your forest.
There you go.
Yeah.
I'll make a plug later for an organization to get into as far as prescribed fire. But yeah, no, possums are top nest raiders too. I mean, you see those in most of the studies as far as they'll eat an egg. So I think it's worth making a distinction between something that's gonna actively push a hen off of her nest and then steal the eggs versus something that maybe if the hen's dead or off, you know, feeding for an hour, will come in and eat eggs. Because I think that's an important distinction. So I don't imagine a possum is one that's going to, in a lot of cases, and certainly it could happen, and I'm sure there's 100 people who are going to call in like, I've got nest cam photo or trail cam photos of a possum pushing a hen off. But I don't think that's going to be the primary way that a possum comes across eggs. I think the hen will have been depredated, and then the possum will find the eggs, you know, a day or two later. As far as armadillos, I think it's exactly that same idea. So,
same thing as a possum.
Yep, they'll come across eggs. I've been getting that question a lot in the last couple of weeks, and so I looked up a little bit of relevant research, and so armadillos. There was 2 studies that were done in Texas where they looked at, and I think they were artificial nests. So, you know, whether or not you can draw conclusions from an artificial nest versus a native nest, I suppose, is up in the air. But they were published, so someone thought they were good science. 1 in 118 nests were raided by an armadillo, and in the other one, it was like 1 in 58. So not a primary nest predator on those in Texas. I found another one in Arkansas where they actually looked at like armadillo stomach contents. So they went around. I don't know what the protocol was, but my guess is they were driving around in a truck looking for armadillos to shoot. So they went out, they shot armadillos, they looked at the stomach contents, and in 0 cases did they find any eggshells or baby bird bones. And that would be from any ground nesting bird, not just turkeys. So there's no doubt that if an armadillo, in my mind, there's no doubt that if an armadillo ran across an egg or a nest that was unattended, it would eat those eggs. I just don't see them being aggressive enough to push a hen off of her nest.
Yep.
Yeah.
And raccoons and foxes would be.
I think so. I think there's
pushers
for sure. Like foxes on up. I can imagine that. You know, a hen has a lot of time and effort invested in trying to get those eggs hatched. So if it's within the first day or two, I bet a raccoon will push her off and she'll just abandon it and say, "This isn't a good spot. I need to go somewhere else." You know, if you're day 26 out of 28, she may decide to put up a fight just to see what happens. While a raccoon could certainly do some damage to a turkey, turkeys are pretty brutal sometimes too. You know, I've been hit in the head with turkey wings and it's a clobber. So, the predators are absolutely a talking point that folks use, and I don't doubt that there's more of them, and I suspect more nests are getting predated, but I really do think that ties back into just less of that good habitat on the ground. It just really concentrates where the hens have to be. Or it's something else where like a hen is just deciding to put her nest in less than great habitat because that's the only option she has. And that really just increases the probability that's going to get predated.
So before we get into the hunting seasons, which I wanted to bring up, so I wanted to put this out there. So if I'm kind of around this number, so like peak 2004 is kind of what I found, but Missouri's sitting around like 600,000 birds. Today we're about 350,000. How do you go about, like, how do we know those numbers?
Yeah. So we're in the process of building a really good complex population model, which will give us a lot of certainty in the number that we will end up publishing. It's probably a year or two out. We're still doing some little add-on projects to give us better estimates for some of the vital rates. As of right now, and I know other states kind of use the same sort of back of the envelope math, it's about 10 times the spring harvest. So that's for as long as I've been able to notice it, that's what the state biologists have done in Missouri. And when we've done the more intensive modeling work, it lines up pretty well.
Okay.
So you mentioned population was about 600,000 at one point. Harvest was about 60,000.
There you go.
That makes sense.
Yep.
Okay.
Last year was about 36,000 in the harvest, so we would have
Right.
estimated the population
So you're about
350, give or take. Yeah.
And speaking of the population, so like 1950s, if you kind of look up that, we were down to like 2,500.
Right.
I mean, it was pretty
That was
low.
in the 50s.
Right.
And that was
What about 30s? I mean, were we pretty much
probably
nothing?
Either lower or around there. I
Around
mean,
there, yeah.
we always sort of had like that core, I think, in the Ozarks around Peck Ranch. But yeah, no, I mean, I think it was more or less shot out as people started to move into the country.
just the uncontrolled hunting,
Yep.
destroying habitat.
Yep.
And then they had a big, restoration of, the habitat restoration. And obviously you start having regulations on hunting itself. And then
as you move
we've
birds,
seen an increase.
Did Missouri move farm birds in first? Or
yeah, they tried that. They tried
I
to
heard
use.
that didn't work well.
It was a complete failure. So then they hit on the notion that instead of trying to use pen raised birds, they'd capture wild birds and move them around, and that worked a lot better. I think altogether they moved about 5,500 birds in Missouri, and some of that was to other regions of Missouri. But then those, of course, we helped stock other states. Like Ohio has a whole bunch of Missouri birds to start their population, and Wisconsin and Texas and things like that. So,
Gotcha. So to jump into the season, so that would be the next thing I was kind of thinking of.
Well, when was our first turkey
go ahead.
season?
1960.
60.
Yeah, it was a 3-day season.
Yeah, you said that earlier. 3
We
days.
were looking
yeah.
up. I was like 3-day season, 1 bird limit.
Yeah, I think 700 total permits, and I believe they harvested 94 birds.
Okay.
Gotcha.
A
And then
3-day season.
80s, we
Imagine
went
that.
to like a 2-week.
2 week in the 80s, and then 1998 we sort of settled into our current framework where it was a 3-week season, 2 bird limit for the spring.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what I wanted to get into. So let's kind of divide up the season and pros and cons of how we feel about it. And we can start anywhere. So one, we're seeing this decline, which we've all stated now. So we've got that laid out there. So one, when we went from, I understand going from the 3-day to 4-day to 2 weeks. I get it. 3 days are really short, and there was no birds really back then. But as we see now a decline over the past how many every years, more than 5, wouldn't it be common sense to go back to a 2-week then?
Yeah, so in the spring season specifically.
Yeah, in the spring season. Yeah, just roll it back a little bit.
Sure.
We increased it because the population was increasing.
Increased
I would imagine
opportunity because there's more birds.
there's more birds, so we increased it to 3 weeks.
Yep.
Well, now we're seeing a decline. Why not just roll it back to 2 weeks?
Well,
Yeah.
I don't. Yeah, is that the answer, or is it moving the dates around anyways?
Well, that too.
Yeah,
but
I'll address both.
yeah.
I
So
don't
the
know.
way, I mean, and hats off to the early Missouri turkey biologists, because they thought through this really well. So if you look at what a lot of the other states that are moving their season, it's moving it later. The idea is that if we move our turkey season until after the peak of breeding happens, then we're doing a lot less disruption to, one, we're doing less disruption to that breeding activity, and two, hens are on the nests, so they're less likely to be like accidentally shot or something like that. So they're just a little safer in that regard. So that's really well thought out. And Missouri was always doing that. So 1998, right? That was part of the plan even then. It's like, we don't want to disrupt this breeding behavior by having the season right in the middle of it, or even before it starts, right? So if you shoot that dominant gobbler, and this is new thinking nationwide, but I think in Missouri it's more or less we just accept it. But as you shoot those dominant birds off the ridge top, right, then they have to go through the whole process where they reestablish dominance, right? It's not just like the alpha gets shot, so then the beta now is the alpha. The beta has to now win that spot over the other birds in the area. So by moving the season later, you're kind of avoiding some of that conflict, and there's not going to be like an interruption in the breeding activity. As far as making it a week shorter, we don't find that would do a whole lot for just the exact reasons we're talking about. So our harvest rate is pretty low. It's pretty sustainable, 25, 35%. So any one year we're taking about that many birds out of the population, but we're able to replace that through production. So by shortening the season, we're probably not actually going to be really doing a whole lot as far as protecting more birds, essentially. Further to that point, most of our birds are shot in the first week or two anyway. And then I think this is interesting. This is something that I've learned recently. Only about 5% of Missourians fill that second tag, as it were. So we're really not saving that many birds, if you will, if you want to use saving, from hunters by shortening the season or by decreasing a bag limit. And whenever you look at the regulations that a lot of the other states, right, so Tennessee went from 5 birds to 3. Well, yeah, 5 birds is a lot. It's a lot of birds.
Oh my gosh.
And they're doing a lot of stuff, right? Because didn't they have like a yearly bag limit or something at one time, or they're included like fall into the mix somehow?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I'm not super up to date on a lot of the other states' regulations, but I just know that Missouri has always been on the conservative end, and whenever you look at the changes that other states are making, it really more or less mimics what Missouri's already been doing. So for the spring season, I feel pretty comfortable with the regulations that we have, the structure, the timing. We every year I write up a big regulations proposal, and I present it to a whole variety of committees. And so that's sort of things that we think about critically. But the spring season seems, in my opinion, fairly good.
Yeah, I just thinking out loud would tell me that if you, I know it might not help a lot, but you roll it back to 2 weeks, and then doing like a 1 bird limit. Or Chandler was like, you pay for a tag, you get your 1 bird. If you want to get another one, then purchase a second, almost like buying a doe tag, right?
Yeah, I was just thinking. And you said like,
but
you explained like me, like I don't, that second tag on my turkeys usually, I'm kind of crappie fishing.
Sure.
I want to chase after that first bird, and then the second bird, I don't think I've ever filled the second bird. And I'm okay with that. But
I just feel like, it might not help a ton, but any help is better than no help. So you roll back 2 weeks, you do a 1 bird limit, or you do if you shoot 1 bird, then you can buy your next tag. I would venture to guess most people do the 1 bird and they're done. Based off of just what I see. After the first week of me hunting, I kind of like, okay, I want to go fishing. I want to go look for morel mushrooms and, crappie fish. Well, I mean,
so with all of the
more birds survive.
Sure. Maybe, because there's yearly mortality, right? So not every bird that makes it through the hunting season will survive. So there's an idea of compensatory versus additive mortality. We imagine with a lot of our game species that it's a little more on the compensatory side, that we're taking birds out of the population at the same rate that they would die naturally anyway. It would be hard to make that case with a lot of hard data, but that's kind of the thinking behind the harvest of game species, right? Because like we should just close the season altogether, right? If we're worried about it in that regard. But whenever we're thinking about regulations and hunting, it's really always a balance between opportunity and the well-being of the species. So that's kind of right. Our mission is like to preserve and protect, wildlife in Missouri, and to provide the opportunity to use and enjoy nature. Right. That's kind of the MDC's vision and whatnot. So I like to use the example, right? So if you fill your tag on opening day of turkey season and the bag limit's 1, like that's it, you're done. You can't go back out and turkey hunt. Even if you never fill that second tag, you no longer have the opportunity to pack a shotgun in the woods and hunt turkeys. Now, for some, that's okay, right? They're on board with that, and those people certainly are not obligated to shoot a second bird. But a lot of people, this is their driving passion in life. This is the 3 weeks that they set aside. Like, they don't have children during this 3 weeks for a reason. Like they take all their time off. I've had people call me already just to like double check when next season's the dates are, because they take those 3 weeks off of work to hunt.
Right, they're paying attention for when that dates roll out.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I can see that too, because you want to give hunters that opportunity to go out there and enjoy it. And so, that fine line of, are we taking too much opportunity away,
right,
versus not? I know we discuss like, and it's probably changed in waterfowl too, so you'd have to fill in on that, but like bird limits or, but I know like in Missouri for like does, like we've changed a lot when it came to deer too. Like you used to be able to go out and you just purchase a booklet of antlerless tags.
Right.
Well, we've rolled that back. Yeah. Okay, we're taking too many. And then we also added the point restriction for a lot of counties. Not all, I don't know if it's all across the state now, but I know most of them have the 4 point. So I've seen it done with other species.
Oh, yeah.
This is why I bring it up, I think you get blowback either way, whether you did or didn't, there's always going to be both sides. So,
and I tried not to make my decisions based on the blowback I get. Otherwise, I'd be paralyzed.
Or
right?
like you'd be like, well, I guess.
Yeah. But
I'm just gonna go crappie fish.
Yeah, but what we see is that by reducing the spring or changing the timing of the spring, we're probably not having much of an impact at all, but it would have an impact on opportunity. And another one would be like school kids, right? So they can't hunt every morning like us. So they're limited to the weekend days. So as you start to remove even those weekend days, right, that really cuts into a 15-year-old's opportunity to go hunt turkeys. And those are the folks that we really need to keep in the fold, right? Like that's the next generation. So that's something that, is in the back of my mind. Now, if we saw that, good grief, we're shooting too many gobblers in a spring, then of course that would be one of the levers I could pull to try and address that. But that doesn't seem to be the case right now.
Right. Well, being on this decline, then my next question would be, at what point do we make a decision? If we talk about having land and not doing anything is really, not helping. Is if we keep declining. Now this year we did go up a little bit from the past couple of years, and maybe that was some rarity that just we sold more permits,
right,
and so the harvest numbers were up. Or I don't know. I didn't look at permit total, so it might not be that. But the success rate was higher this year. Now, if it stays the same, then we're like, okay, that's good. But let's just say we keep on this trend of second lowest harvest total, third lowest harvest total. We just had our worst harvest total, was it last 2 years ago? In 5 years, 10 years, and it's like, okay, it's still dipping. I mean, how long do we take that?
We'd have to look at
before we make a change.
Sure. We'd have to look at a variety of factors. So if we saw, for example, production bounce back and harvest continue to decline, that would be a hint to us that perhaps either hunters are less engaged or involved, or if we saw permit sales dip and a corresponding dip in harvest. I mean, you're right. There has to be some component of hunter effort associated with it. And I absolutely suspect that the good hunting weather this year had a role, maybe even a large role in the increase. I think it's a question we have, and certainly it's
Sure.
one that we evaluate every year,
And
right?
it's an every year evaluation
Every year,
that you guys
yeah.
look at.
And we have a lot of looking up my chain of command, right? Every one of them turkey hunts, and most of them are very, very passionate turkey hunters who are very, very concerned with how we manage the resource. So I don't know if that gives people any like solace or not, but
They're
it's
not just people sitting behind a desk
That's right.
that don't like hunting.
these are not bureaucrats that are just trying to make the fewest waves. These are people who are very invested in the resource.
Well, that's good. My next season would be the fall
Sure.
one, which isn't really a big season, but the first thought out of my head is well, two. One, let's just get rid of it.
Sure.
If it's not that big of a season anyways,
Right.
and we don't kill enough, let's just get rid of it so we just save those birds.
Mm-hmm.
Or two, let's just go to male only
Mm-hmm.
and let the hens survive into the next season.
Yep.
Has that ever been looked at or thought about? It's probably brought up every year.
Oh yeah, no, I would say the spring season is not super controversial, even in the agency. The fall season would be slightly more controversial, for sure. So again, it's really that concept of opportunity versus damage done essentially to the population. So I don't think any of us would make the argument that one hen harvested per year is going to have an impact, right? I do think that we would all agree that if we shot all the hens every year, that would have an impact. So there's somewhere in between there that we can find some common ground. Just to put numbers to it, because I brought my cheat sheet, we shot about 4,300 total birds last year.
In the fall?
No, in the fall,
Yeah.
correct. And that's across the entire state. About 60% of those, or 2,500, were reported as hens or jennies, right? So, a majority of the birds harvested in the fall are probably hens. I use probably because we've done a little bit of research and we're in the process of it right now, where we look at the quality of that telecheck data, and it turns out, at least in the year one, the ratios are about flipped. So in fact, the samples I received, more male birds were harvested than female birds, and jakes were almost always called a female whenever they're harvested in the young of the year, right? Because it can be a little more challenging, which sounds like I'm dodging the question. I think so overall, right, where we're talking about the number of birds harvested in Missouri during the fall, specifically hens, because I think that's probably what drives most of the conversation. It's about one hen for every 28 or 29 square miles of land in Missouri. It's just at such a low level that it doesn't seem like it's going to have an impact. And in fact, the research would indicate that anything less than a 4% harvest rate, which is a little bit different than just the harvest numbers, should be sustainable. So the work we've done looking at hen harvest rate, where you actually band a known population of hens and see how many of those bands get returned, shows that in the 80s, when we were killing, closer to 30,000 birds in the fall, it was about 4.5%. In the late 2000s, it's dipped to about 1% as far as the harvest rate goes. So we're taking at or less than 1% of the hens out of the population, and a lot of those are young birds as well. So as far as by removing that as an opportunity, how much are we helping? The answer is probably not very much, or maybe not at all. But we are, removing that opportunity for folks who are really interested. And I get far fewer phone calls and emails from people who are pro fall hunting. But the ones I do get are, this is their favorite time to be out in the woods. It's certainly a traditional hunting opportunity for Missourians. That's something that's been around about as long as the spring season. And so I think, we should keep in mind that there are people who love to fall hunt. It's a great time to be in the woods. Not everyone wants to chase deer. So that's part of my calculation. That's sort of where I.
Yeah. And then so I'm playing devil's advocate, but with the if all we have to do is call in and say, well, that's my favorite thing to hunt, and all I like to do is shoot does. So you guys limited now what I can shoot, or hey, I only get to go and I hunt for meat, but I don't have any deer with 4 points on one side. So I guess I'm done hunting. but we still changed
Sure.
the protocols to it. So,
Yep.
I mean, protocols have been changed. I think we're just kind of, I think from what I'm hearing from you, it's definitely, I mean, it's looked at every year.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's studies that even we're not seeing. I mean, I'm sure you guys are doing studies. You talked about is it up in Putnam County?
Yeah.
You're doing the weather.
Part of that
the,
is-
the you know, so you can
Yep.
kind of see those severe weather things. We didn't bring up, but you had mentioned to me in Chandler, you're even doing the banded
Mm-hmm.
turkeys. Are you doing the internal?
Yeah, that's only
Maybe.
that's only for males. That's to look at harvest rates of males. To just double check, to take the temperature in a couple of regions in Missouri. Like, what does our harvest rate look like? Is it sustainable with these present regulation structures?
But
Yeah.
things are being done.
Sure.
You know, and it's hey, I don't know if I'd want to be in your seat. Okay, so you know, but as I sit here interviewing you, I want to
Oh, sure,
bring
sure.
up these things that I hear.
Oh,
that,
yeah.
you know that's what I hear. So
And I think there's more conversation about the fall season this year than there has been in years previous. Obviously, Kansas just closed their fall season. Arkansas hasn't had a fall season for a couple seasons. You know, I'd be curious to see if they see their population rebound, right? Because I don't think it's. I don't know that it's the wrong call. I don't know that it's the right call. I don't know that they're going to see a bounce. But what they are going to see is no fall turkey hunters in their state, right?
mm-hmm.
And I think that's a user group that I don't know. It's not one that I'm prepared to just throw under the bus to make a point. If
Right.
that makes sense.
yeah.
You know, I don't want to do the thing where we just do a thing that we don't expect is going to work just to prove that we're doing a thing. I try to stay away from that, right? Our information would indicate that closing a fall season isn't going to have an impact. We did some modeling to that effect before I got here, and the results were, close the fall season. What does the population growth rate do? It continues to decline, right? It's not that we're shooting hens in the fall. It's that we don't have the habitat on the ground.
Yeah.
But
habitat seems to be the resounding
yeah, I hate that
factor, though.
I just, it's impossible for me to get away from it. But every time I talk to folks, I just keep coming back to the habitat.
Yeah.
If we can't get poults to that, that magic 30 days old period, it doesn't matter. We're just not getting them there.
Is that where we need to, if we can get to 30, their survival rate just
Yeah, it more or less flattens off, right? So at that point, they're almost certainly going to survive. Now, there hasn't been a lot. It's interesting. There hasn't been a lot of research done between that 30-day period and then through their first breeding season. We don't know how many actually survive because it's hard to track a poult, right? It starts out as a little 2-4 ounce bird and then grows to a 10-pound bird in that first year.
Yeah.
So something with a battery life that could exist on a 10-pound bird, you can't put on a 2-pound bird or 2-ounce bird. But yeah, generally speaking, if you can get a poult to 30 days, they're able to roost off the ground. They're able to evade predators. They can feed themselves. They don't need quite as much from mom at that point. So survival really, really flattens out and it looks good at that point.
I've even seen some studies of insect population across the country.
So I teased the North Missouri project, but it's actually, if we've got time, I'd love to talk about it because
What you got?
It's really, really interesting. And so we all kind of acknowledge that it's production is the issue, but no one's really looked at what's driving the decline in production. So this project is looking at weather, right? So that's a component. So they've got all these weather stations. They're looking at really specific habitat characteristics from where the hen either nests or where she takes her poults. And the hens even have GPS packs on them so we can get a location during the brood rearing season every 15 minutes. But also within that little backpack has got an accelerometer. So at the points we see on the map, we can actually tell what she's doing as well. So if she's feeding, we know that. If she's running away, we know that. If she's roosting, that's information that we can gather. So we're looking at habitat selection at a really fine scale. They're looking at insect abundance and diversity. So at a variety of random points on the study area and where we have poults actually existing using our GPS data, we go in and sample the insect communities there to see how abundant they are. Are hens selecting for areas with more or more abundant insects, things like that. And then there's even a predator density component to it. So they're out, they're probably just wrapping up now, but they're out trapping and recapturing nest predators, raccoons, skunks, and possums. They're putting it's a mark recapture type study, so they're able to put them out, and then based on the number they recapture, they can estimate densities across the gradient of habitats. So, in this type of habitat, we see a raccoon density of X, and then as you move to this habitat, the raccoon density goes down some percentage, and so it's a really broad study that's looking at all the things that we've talked about today, and it's going to really shed a lot of light on things that we think may be issues, but we don't know, right? So this would be the type of study that, as we had discussed, how important is weather? This is the study that's going to be like, compared to these other three, it's more or less important than predation or habitat selection, that sort of thing. So I'm really excited. We're about 3 years into the 5-year project, so there's some work yet to be done, but it's
that's kind of when we'll start seeing the publication of this study,
Yeah.
like 5 years.
I'd like
so
to get
a couple
some
more years.
Yeah, I'd like to get some more kind of check-ins on it before that, because people are excited and interested as well. NWTF spent a fair bit of money on the project buying GPS backpacks, and so they've asked for updates and things like that. Hopefully we get more out sooner than later. That's always the goal, but
Yeah.
the wheels of academia grind pretty slow.
Sure. Well, turkey, it's always going to be a hot topic.
Yeah.
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 Real quick, what's your opinion on the 1 p.m.?
Yeah, so that's a good one, and one that, so I grew up as a turkey hunter in Missouri, and it's just like, I don't know, you stop hunting at 1 p.m., then you go, whatever, you go crappie fishing or go mushroom hunting.
Mm-hmm.
It is an interesting opportunity situation, though, right? So we talked about school kids can only really hunt during the weekends unless their parents are prepared to let them out. By opening it to all day, you do open that avenue to kids, right? So I would come home and go bow hunting in the afternoons. In theory, I could come home and go turkey hunting after school.
Yeah.
They find that overall harvest probably would increase some percentage, 5-10%, but it wouldn't be a huge number
really?
of harvest increase. Like most people still are going to go turkey hunting in the morning because that's kind of how we're wired anyway. Like the bird coming off the roost, there's like a certain aesthetic that turkey hunters are really drawn to, and that's part of it. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely a topic of conversation, and every year it's part of the regulations discussion for sure.
Yeah.
If you go to all year, you give that opportunity, like we're talking about, to give people more time to hunt.
More time to hunt.
They've already paid for the tag, so we might as well just let them get out there.
It's an, if you will, an underrepresented community of hunters, specifically during turkeys, right? Those youth hunters can go out after school, which I think would be pretty cool.
And traveling around different states, they're always like, "Well, you can't hunt past 1." Yeah. But they just think it's mind-boggling.
Yeah. And some of the more recent states who have addressed that, like Virginia as an example, the first week they still close at 1, but then the second and third weeks they open it all day. So there's some intelligent regulation wrangling to be done for sure. But I don't know. Obviously the politics, if you will, I don't like to be swayed by the politics, but we just had a whole conversation about how the turkey population has declined, and now we're talking about, maybe we could shoot a few more during the spring.
Right. Yeah.
I'm open to the conversation, certainly,
Right.
and I know that a lot of folks are inclined that way, but man, I would really like to see a couple good years of production.
Yeah.
And I guess I'm sure I have a lot of questions, but one, just real quick, do you have meetings with other states just to kind of see what they're doing, even though, I mean, land is different, habitat's different state to state, but do you still, is there a gathering of intelligence between states?
Yeah. So I'll be in Oklahoma and then in North Dakota, one of which is the Southeast SIAFWA. I don't know what the acronym is, but it's sort of a group of the southeastern states come together and they talk about deer and turkey regulations, and then the other ones, the Midwest states up in North Dakota, we come together and talk about deer and turkey regulations and just things generally that affect us all. Because you're right, I mean, while it's easy to think of like a Missouri kind of centric approach, all the states around us, we're all kind of pulling the same direction. And so being able to share information, get ideas from each other is really valuable. And it's something that, I look forward to most about this job.
Yeah. Good stuff.
So what I'm gathering is, we got to get our habitat up so we can get more opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Or keep the opportunity we have.
That seems to be the big underlying factor.
Yeah.
If you're listening.
Yeah. If I could,
and you can contact the MDC
Sure.
to get help on it or some
Absolutely.
guidance.
Yep.
Yeah, I would say if you're listening to this and you think to yourself, "Gosh, I haven't done any habitat work, or the habitat work I've done has been fairly minimal, but I want to see more turkeys," then absolutely get a hold of your private land conservationist. But also consider joining, and this is a free plug to them. I'm not even a member. There's these prescribed burn associations that are popping up across the state. And they're doing that type of work too, where they go in and they provide assistance, they provide guidance, information, in some cases equipment to help you get prescribed fire on the ground in your area. Because doing a TSI project, a timber stand improvement project, is great for a year or two, but if you don't maintain it with fire, 5 or 6 years later, you're going right back in and doing all that same work over again. So
That's
it's
awesome.
it's chainsaw and drip torch, not one or the other.
Yeah.
And they're great organizations. It's like $25 a year to be a part of it, and you participate in a burn or two, and then you can have folks come to your property and help you do a burn. So it's a pretty cool organization that I really hope gains some steam.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's neat.
Mhm.
That's neat. Well, I know you're a busy man, and especially during turkey season, everybody's emailing you or calling for Mr. Oakley. And get that guy on the phone.
Yep.
But we do appreciate you taking the time to come in, and I definitely learned some things today too. So anytime I can get some more knowledge or other viewpoints and things like that. So
Yeah, I appreciate
this
that.
has been good. And if anybody has questions or things like that, you can always reach out to us on our social media platforms and things like that, and I can pass them along, or wouldn't be that hard to
Nope.
email the MDC,
Yeah,
if you
nope.
got questions and they try to get to them. So
Feel free. Yeah, just shoot me an email. I'm happy
Yeah.
to talk to
Yeah.
folks that have a similar passion.
Yes.
A lot of times, you said, I'm not sure I'd want to be in your shoes as far as we've got a very enthusiastic user base, but I try to flip it and think of it the other way. These are people who are passionate. They want the same thing as me.
Yeah.
We need to work
Yeah.
together to do what's important, because ultimately I need turkey hunters more than turkey hunters need me. So
Yeah.
I'm happy to talk.
No doubt.
Feel free to reach out.
No doubt. Well, hopefully we're on the mend. We'll get this thing under control. So
Yeah.
we're all working towards the same goal. I can promise you that.
Pat, me and you should go up north and on your property and do a brood survey.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Do you need more people doing those surveys?
You always can use more information.
I'd never heard of it until a few weeks ago.
Yeah, luckily Missouri has had one of the longest running brood surveys and one of the most well participated in brood surveys. I think last year we had eyes on 75,000 turkeys for our brood survey. So other states are
That's awesome.
very envious of that. But yeah,
that's cool.
the more the better.
Let's do a brood survey.
Yeah.
I like it. Well, appreciate it again. And thanks for coming, and guess you're heading back to home.
Headed back.
And do some more studying.
Got some
Do some
phone calls to
more-
make
yeah,
along the way.
Yeah, so I appreciate it. Thank
Absolutely.
you.
Yeah, thanks for
All
having me.
good stuff.
Do you want to do?
We can. Yeah.
Let's do it.
Okay, if you guys like this, make sure to leave us a rating down below. We got plenty of social media outlets. You can give us a follow on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, YouTube. Check them all out and give us a follow.
Awesome. See ya.
I think it's time for me